We're back. Season 9, Episode 2, Beginning of the End, Part 2. Big fight with Sombra, great scene, Discord's awesome, everything's awesome, the end. Cool. Oh, and Grogar got his Legion. Freaking called it, by the way. I mean, I guess I shouldn't feel too proud about that one, but yeah, no, I was absolutely right about Grogar's motivations there. Yeah, go ahead, do your own thing. And when you fail, you'll be a point for the others. Let me go ahead and say that I liked Part 2 much better than Part 1. While Part 1 was some decent establishment, it had some weird structure. The voice actor for Sombra is the person who voiced Flutter Guy. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but that's the actor. He doesn't actually do a lot of other voice acting, which is why I don't have anything else to list. I'm pretty sure he's in Dragon Ball Z, which might be where you're hearing him from. So... yeah, exactly, Raskor. Yeah, no, Grogar's plan was pretty legit. It's the kind of thing I would do. Don't read too much into that. Sorry, yeah, the second voice for Flutter Guy, not the original, which was a completely separate person. So they jump right into it. I love the visuals of this episode. This episode doesn't have a lot of intellectual bent. That was more the first episode. But this episode has a lot of presentation, which lends itself a lot more towards the emotional aspect of things. There's a brilliant scene, and I do mean this, where... I'll use these. Where Twilight is just sitting there, and her friends are like, oh, we're going to beat you, Sombra. And she's just... And even after they charge after them, she's just sitting there, clanking the pieces together. Yeah, actual shock. It's a surprisingly good presentation of shock. For those of you not aware, shock is a word that's used a little bit too much because not a lot of people actually really understand how it works. But when a real person goes through real shock, their mind literally doesn't work quite right because it's kind of like... and so what happens is the brain... The human mind is designed to isolate things it doesn't understand until it can process them. You know, hold please. But that's not a joke. That's not a meme. That's actually how the brain works. And so you tend to fixate on something so your mind keeps functioning and the gears in the background can keep processing until you can work through it. If you're not allowed to work through it, that can lead to very serious psychological issues and is one of the causes of something, a very broad category of problems called PTSD. Which has its own thing. So yeah, Twilight's just sitting there in actual shock. Clink, 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 clink. And it does take her a minute to reset. In fact, it takes her several minutes to reset. Which is logical. This is especially true if you presume that the loss of the tree and the elements actually had a literal tangible effect on Twilight. We know it had a tangible effect on Starscroll the Bearded. That makes sense. He's the one who set up the damn thing. But it's interesting to think about because, well, we'll come back to that, okay? We'll come back to that. So, rewinding a second. So Sombra traps the group after they fight him. It's like, I'm going to leave you trapped here while I go conquer Ponyville. On the one hand, this is a dumb Bond villain moment. But on the other hand, there's actually a lot of logic to what he's doing. He wants them to experience exactly what they do in this episode. In fact, if you're paying attention, he actually wants them to escape that. Because he wants them to fear. Again, the thematic core of both of these episodes continues to remain strong. You'll notice that the predominant fear of the episode is Twilight's. What is the worst type of fear? I'm just going to answer you this for a second. The worst type of fear is something you're afraid of that comes true. A fear proven. That is the worst kind of fear. So, Twilight, if you're paying attention, and I tracked it 6 times in this episode, she mentions that I'm not ready. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a plan. And she consistently and persistently says, I wasn't ready for this, and this is screwed up, and now everything's gone, and I wasn't ready, and this is my fault. It is everything she was afraid of in episode 1 proven. Proven. I should put that in quote unquotes. Yeah, you want proof? Look out the window. Exactly. And that is horrifying. I'm going to bring up Star Trek because I often do, because I know Star Trek inside and out. How many of you have seen the two-parter, The Best of Both Worlds, from Star Trek The Next Generation? If you haven't, what's wrong with you? But if you have, I'm not going to go into it. I'm just going to assume that you have. How many of you remember the central core story element of Best of Both Worlds Part 1? And please feel free to tell me it right now. Anybody who's seen my rumination on this knows where I'm going with this. Raskor hits it immediately. Best of Both Worlds Part 1 is Riker's story. It is all about Riker. The whole narrative rotates around him. Everything from Shelby to the Borg to losing Picard is not about Picard. It's not even about the Borg. It is about Riker. It is probably the most Riker-centric episode in all of TNG, all culminating in him giving that order. There's a reason that scene has so much power, and it's not just because it's a brilliantly executed scene, it's because the whole episode built up to that one word. Well, 3 words, Mr. Warfire. I bring this up because I noticed this episode is pulling the same trick. Sombra serves the same function as the Borg here. And let's be clear, just like the Borg, Sombra is presented well, and he needs to be. If you want something to be terrifying, horrifying, dreadful, it needs to lean on the presentation aspect of things. You need to hit that emotional core. We need to see Sweetie Belle and desperate attempts to fix her. We need to see Apple Bloom. We need to see Starlight and Spike. We need to see all of the characters we've seen. I don't know how many of you are paying attention, but virtually every NPC that we've seen in both Canterlot and in Ponyville was present at one point or another. We need to see that. We need to feel that. We need to have that impression of what Sombra is and the threat he poses. Despite being a nice big ham, he remains a terrifying force. Also black licorice fruitcake, which is funny because it's a joke, right? Except it's not. You notice they played that straight. There was no winking at the camera like there usually is with Pinkie Pie. She is legitimately freaked out about that, and her friends legitimately comfort her about it. No rolling her eyes, no, oh, whatever, Pinkie. And that's probably helped by the fact that as they were hauling away the cake, as the family was hauling away the cake, you notice even the babies were there and mind-controlled too. Did you also notice the animation model, the skeleton that they were using and the animation framework that they were using for each of the ponies that are mind-controlled was different? That was not the standard movement. In fact, if I was to call them anything, I would call them zombie-like. Again, presentation. Even if you didn't notice that, it's very obvious that what we're seeing here is unnatural. How many of you noticed the desaturation of the color of their coats, too? It's most obvious when they're surrounding the main 6, who obviously have the full coat color, so you can kind of see the distinction there. All of this sells the Borg. I mean, Sombra. But none of that would have the same impact if we didn't have that same personal character story on Twilight, because this is Twilight's episode. Just like Best of Both Worlds was Riker's episode. And yeah, what we see here, it's been implied before, but now we understand why they were so terrified of him. And why fear is such a powerful weapon for him, since he literally draws power from fear, and he has gotten very good at causing it. He has gone out of his way to ensure that he can cause this fear in order to feed on it, in order to grow stronger, in order to cause more fear. He has created his own feedback loop. It is actually terrifying. Then, Twilight says something. She says, my magic isn't strong enough to break this without the elements of harmony. Question, do you think that's true? Or do you think that's her fear and her lack of confidence and all of the other things we've been talking about manifesting directly? I mean, this has some applications in real life, but in a setting where literal magic can come from internal confidence and connections with other people in a tangible, tactile format, yeah, no, I think that she actually, I think that she is, I think she was being hit by everything. I think she said, I can't, and therefore she couldn't, right? And again, that has some applications in real life too. Not, I mean, if you try to step in front of a train and say, "Oh, I can't stop the train," that's not related. But there are situations where you can do something, and if you say you can't, you are more likely to fail. So, she fails at this. We see the black licorice cake. Then we see the Everfree Forest start to growing. I love the idea of mastery of the environment. It's something fiction doesn't address as often as I'd like. It's probably come up in like 3 stories ever. If you're wondering, Star Trek, Kingdom Hearts of all things, and My Little Pony. I'm sure there's others, but those are the 3 big ones. Anyways, I bring all that up because Impressionista is just dumping subs on my face, apparently. And that's why I brought that up. How could you? I bring that up because it's an awesome concept, but what's really cool about it is how much you can play with it. For example, let's say you're going to Ryza. I hate to bring Star Trek into this again, but for those of you not aware, Ryza is a world that has mastery over its environment. They have multiple environmental controls that constantly maintain a certain atmosphere, a certain percentage of humidity in the air, a certain this, a certain that, etc. Now, what happened in the episode Let He Who Is Without Sin, which is a terrible episode that I hate, but nevertheless this one point makes perfect sense, is if you take away that control, what happens is immediately it tries to balance itself. Is it done? It's done. Thank you, Impressionista, very much. I do always appreciate those subs. Thank you. If you know what you want to put those towards, please let me know. I'll jot it down here. Yeah, that episode, I hate that episode. God, I hate that episode so much. But even a bad episode can have good world building. So for those of you not aware, let me just say this very simply. What is a storm? A storm is weather patterns rebalancing themselves. That's the simplest and easiest way to explain that. There's more that goes into that, obviously, but the general idea is weather, as we think of it, is more about different factors balancing and counterbalancing and rebalancing as external factors come in and affect it, right? It's one of the reasons why there's such a thing as a runaway storm, when, you know, those factors get so out of balance they can never be rebalanced, right? Yeah, exactly. It's kind of basic thermodynamics, but you get the general idea, right? You got it. Dealer's choice. Thank you again. The reason I bring that up is what we see that in Let He Who Is Without Sin is exactly that. They take away the control, and, well, without the control maintaining an artificial balance, what happens is the weather systems start to rebalance themselves, and we have nightmarish death, doom, rain, and cold, because of course they do. What do we see in this episode? The moment the artificial control is removed, the forest starts growing wildly and violently out of control, probably too much so. So there's a point that's mentioned, that I've actually mentioned before briefly, and it's the idea that what did they do before they had the tree? And Star Swirl actually flat out mentions, what did you think we did before we had the tree? Well, we kept it in control. But the way they're fighting it is 2 princesses plus one of the most learned mages ever barely keeping up with keeping the forest out of control. What I'm trying to say is I don't think the forest usually grows at that rate. I don't think it usually is that much of a problem. I think what we're seeing is a little bit of the rubber banding that we just mentioned, the equilibrium. I think that it's trying to absolutely, because that control has been so violently removed. You'll notice this problem hasn't been solved by the end of the episode, by the way, and I really hope they address that in future episodes. And yes, this scene also gets to showcase something else that I like very much, which I'll talk about in just a second, and Star Swirl actually in action, which is something we haven't really gotten to see before. I like how Star Swirl hovers the same way Starlight does, by the way. That's a cool thing. I like the idea, just a little mental preference thing, that only the really powerful mages can do that kind of flying trick. Anyway, so princesses are fighting, Star Swirl's fighting. That's cool. Twilight still doesn't have a plan. I've been keeping track, by the way. This is the 4th time she says this. She doesn't have a plan. But we're going to go do something anyways. There's a line of thought in that, and it's a dangerous line of thought if taken too far, as all lines of thought are. But there is a validity to that. When you're not sure what to do, just keep doing. It's because you don't actually know. It's so you don't lose momentum. You know, this is true on a mundane scale, like when you're writing, or maybe you're on a project, or maybe you're just trying to clean something. and you're not sure how to clean this, so just clean something, just do something. Keep the momentum going, keep yourself working. If nothing else, time and perspective can change, and you might be able to think of something, adapt and move and alter, right? Now, again, as with all things taken too far, that can cause some issues. You don't want to just run into every situation without a plan. The point is more, get something done in order to get to a plan, in order to get to the point where you can figure out what you're doing. Wow. That's applicable. So she's like, all right, I don't know what to do. Let's go. And then they teleport to Catalan. Quick aside, how many of you have played Lotro? I imagine it's actually none of you. But if anybody has, I'm curious. Now, this isn't really a spoiler, but allow me to kind of spoil part of Lotro, because it's a storytelling device I almost never see. And it bothers me a little bit because it's a wonderful storytelling device. The summary of the device is A and B are both equally needed. But let me explain how this works. In Lord of the Rings Online, Lotro, you don't play one of the 9 Fellowship members. You play someone else. You could be a human, a dwarf, or a elf. And you're an adventurer who's doing what you can, right? But here's the thing. The Fellowship needed to get the ring to Mordor to defeat Sauron. If that didn't happen, no matter what we do, it doesn't matter, right? The ring bearer and the Fellowship and their quest was mandatory. But so were we. We were clearing the path and covering their back. One of the major plot arcs in early Lotro, before we go to Khazad-dûm, what's the friggin' name of it? Moria. Before we go to Moria, is we have to make sure to deal with Angmar. If you don't know what Angmar is, don't worry about it. But it's an entire, Sauron-aligned kingdom in the north that was causing issues and problems and would have just swept everything if not for the fact that we kept them in check while the Fellowship were doing their thing, right? And that's my overall point. It's hard to write it properly, as maybe this is why few people don't do it. But both groups were necessary, and that's exactly what we see here. We have the group keeping the forest at bay so things don't get worse and things can be contained, and we have the group going and dealing with the primary issue. Both groups are necessary, both groups are critical, and I love the way they showcase that. I really, really am curious what they're going to do with the tree after this. But anyways, or not the tree, sorry, the forest. Moving on. So, Lotro stuff happens. Then we see this is when the cameos just come out all over the place. This is when the animation really comes to bear with the zombie-like, the somber-like movements. This then leads to her saying, I don't know what to do for the 5th time. And her just teleporting in. Like, okay, well, we're in to face Sombra. I don't know what to do. But again, notice she is still moving forwards. Then Discord shows up. Hi, Discord. By the way, pickles with jam? That sounds terrible. Anyways, so Discord's like, fine, I'll help you out. I was really hoping you'd make this work. Notice how did this whole scene... Now, okay, let's pause for a second. Towards the end of the episode, Discord admits that he was faking it. I actually didn't think that was going to happen. But, so, I'm right. But before I knew that, rewinding here, it's like, oh gosh, thank God you're here. I don't know what we'd do without you. And yeah, Discord's reaction to this whole thing is like, no, that's not the point. That's really not the point. Don't lean on me. He is continuing to be the safety net. And let's be clear, since he was faking, we can now say with total certainty, he was absolutely the safety net. If they did actually fail here, I guarantee with total certainty, he would have just Sombra, and that would have been the end of that. And he himself makes it very clear, not only in the episode, but at the end of the episode. Like, the thing is, hang on, before I get to that, the thing is, there's this bit where, Sombra's attacking him, he's just like, and he's just casually, effortlessly, without any kind of work whatsoever, holding off Sombra, because of course he is. As we've talked about last episode, and as has been reinforced in this episode, Discord is literally on a different tier. He's on a different weight class than Sombra. Rewind a second. So Discord's like, okay, fine, I'll help. But just this once. Come on, you'll figure out that. And then, yeah, and then they say, I don't know what we do without you. And he looks dejected, sad, down, just like, So then they move forwards, and we've already talked about how Discord, makes this work. We've already talked about how Discord operates. And so, yeah, Discord throws the fight. Really, really obviously throws the fight. I mean, come on. First of all, the first thing he does, pay attention to this, because this is a brilliant scene, but I love this scene. First thing he does is he lays out the situation for Twilight. He lays out the stakes, he lays out her character arc, and he makes sure that her mind, there's a trick to this. It's called focusing your attention. It's sometimes referred to as pink elephants. When you say something and you say it in a certain way, people tend to think about that thing, whether they mean to or not, whether they want to or not. It's something that fiction doesn't use that often as well as it should, but it's the idea that if I prompt you to something, then you'll be like, oh, right, and it'll be like a light bulb moment because you are now thinking about it, right? So he gets Twilight thinking about the situation. You've got this, you don't need external help, you can do this, but obviously you don't. It's okay, it's cool. And yeah, John Delancey is just nailing this scene, by the way, this whole scene. Then, the next thing he does is he flat out states his weakness for Fluttershy right in front of Sombra in a big, obvious, painting a target on his face kind of a way. Then, rather than doing anything that he could have done to defeat the situation effortlessly, he's like, oh no, I'll totally block it for you, Fluttershy. Now, that being said, I was expecting him to ham it up in the bad way. I was expecting him to be like, oh no, I'm totally hurt, woe is me. Instead, he actually goes straight for it. And again, John Delancey really makes this speech work. He just lays it out. And there's something wonderfully beautiful about this. Because because Discord is reinforcing the concept of harmony. Think about that for a second. Also, there's tons of tiny little details, like the way he's operating, or the fact that he is legitimately pleased at how concerned they are, and it's obvious that they are legitimately concerned for him. There's lots of little touches there that I'm just kind of brushing over because it's this scene is so good. This scene is so good. And then the music starts to do this slow crescendo. Starts to get louder and stronger, and there's almost a military beat coming in, chikung, 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 as they start walking towards him, and Twilight's just initially has some issue, but then is reinforced by her friends literally grabbing their hands, or hooves, and then all of this wonderful things, and Twilight gets actually angry. And yeah, we're not afraid of you. You should be. And there's just this whole scene of them going and confronting the Borg. I mean, Sombra. And yeah, and they just absolutely disintegrate him. I would like to say with total certainty that Sombra is now actually dead and will probably never come back. Please don't spoil if he does, but I would be willing to say that with a fairly strong certainty at this point. He's gone. By the way, did you notice that Twilight has the princess mane while she's doing this? No element of harmony, no anything, no external power shot. Just she, by virtue of actually being herself, actually manifests the princess mane. I just wanted to comment on that there. Anyways, there's also a wonderful 3-point line. We keep telling bad guys, but y'all just don't seem to remember. Friendship is magic. I actually talked about this during the Tyrek episode, the previous Tyrek episode. And yeah, that's true. We've literally seen what the power of friendship is, and it's ludicrously strong in this setting. So, he's gone. So, Discord admits that he was faking. This then leads to some interesting thoughts. So, hang on. We're not even done with the great scene yet. So, Twilight says, a good leader knows how to ask for help when they need it, which is absolutely true, by the way. And she did. And she did need it, and she still managed it. But then Luna and Celestia backtrack, and Discord is angry. Not throwing a fit, Not doing one of those things where they're like, oh, sure, I'm sure. No, you can tell, and again, John Delancey sells this, that is legitimate anger. That is him actually being upset about this. I'm sorry, what? After all that, after that whole setup, and then he admits that he was faking it, and after that whole speech, and you're trying to insist that she's not ready? She just proved! She just proved that she's ready. And it is interesting, because it is very Discord. You know, he did give a great speech. But you'll notice he is legitimately thinking like a friend here. He is actually being supportive here. He really does think Twilight's ready, and there's something just beautiful about this whole setup. I'm sorry, what? I'm out of here. Boom. Screw this mess. Then we cut to the outro. Cozy Glow is attempting to teach harmony. It's harmony. I mean, it is. She's attempting to teach friendship to Tyrek and Chrysalis, and she's failing miserably. And Grogar comes in and says what I already said, you know. Not Tyrek. Sombra can now serve as a warning. I know, right, Act? This is Discord at its prime right here. This is some primo Discord right here. Anyways, and then Grogar's like, you're going to work for me now or die. And then, you know, the other, I love how all of the others are like, please don't kill us. And then end episode. First, thank you, Javan, very much as always. I hope you enjoyed GDQ. I won't be watching it this week. I will be streaming, but I do hope it's a good run. Good runs, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I never watch it live. I always get some work done. It's just I'm doing stream work this week instead of recording work. So, big arc episode, which builds off of not just the previous episode, but honestly the last 8 seasons. Great utilization of Discord. Honestly, I think, and I mean this with total certainty, I'm not memeing when I say this, I think this is the best I've ever seen of Discord. This is the inner light version of Discord right here, you know what I mean? Or not the inner light, sorry, Tapestry, I always get those two confused. This is the Tapestry version of Discord right here. Sombra is portrayed just as terrifying as it should be, and the entire episode hinges around the axis of Twilight and her character, and her pushing through this. This is all about her, as it should be. Again, just like Best of Both Worlds was about Riker. Best of World Part 1 was all about Riker. This is a purple. Part 2 is absolutely a purple. I can't even argue that down. I think Part 1 is going to be a red. Because Part 1 does have a couple of hiccups and a couple of stumbles, and it feels like Part 1 is trying to establish things very, very quickly to the part where it's it's rushed. Exactly, Raskor. It feels like it's just... Okay, but you'll notice Part 2 actually has much better pacing overall. Part 2 literally has moments of just sitting and pausing, like when Twilight's trying to recover, or when they're not sure how they're going to get out of the cage, or when they spend like a solid 2 minutes, which may not sound like a long time, but that's a 12th of the episode, just 2 minutes sitting there watching their friends slowly walk away to Camelot, and so forth and so on. 2 had several moments where it allowed the episode to breathe, and it worked. It really helped the tone and flavor and vibe of everything. Now, it's funny to me, look up this here, this is by the Joanna Lewis and the Christine Songko duo. They've done some interesting episodes, but they've never gone below green. But this is not their first red or their first purple, since they also did A Royal Problem, which I absolutely adored, and The Perfect Pair, which was way better than I thought it would be. This is a hell of a way to begin the new season. And one last thing before we cut off. You'll notice that we have actually changed the status quo. You caught that, right? That's weird. Because now the elements of harmony are gone. The tree is gone. The forest is who knows at this point. And they've already laid down the cards on the table that Twilight is going to be taking over. I don't know where this season's going to go, but there's a lot of directions they could take this in. And that in itself is interesting. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, it is interesting that Sombra managed to do a fairly large amount of actual damage. So, sorry. I know there's one other thing I want to talk about. Wharf effect. No, I didn't, Ross. Let's talk about Wharf effect briefly. Because the way I mentioned how you could do Wharf effect properly. One of the ways to do Wharf effect properly is to establish just how close things come, just how dangerous things are, just how barely you manage something. And then to establish that that was the lower tier compared to the real threat, which is still waiting. And you'll notice that is exactly what this episode does. Sombra comes fairly close to victory. And yeah, the Dominion does this a lot, actually, over in Deep Space Nine. And we still have Grogar, who is on a higher tier, and Tyrek, and Chrysalis, and Cozy Glow. So, interesting to think about. And interesting to ponder. And I actually agree. Sombra, I do think Sombra is a lower tier than Grogar, but I would probably say Sombra was probably the strongest of the group, other than Grogar. Because Sombra has his own feedback loop thing, right? You know, he can create fear, which feeds him to create fear, and blah, 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 blah. So he's damned strong, and he has a damned powerful weapon. Also, that's a very good point, Ect. Nobody knows that the Evil 3, the Legion, nobody knows the Legion of Doom thing is even a thing. They just think Sombra showed up. I really, really hope that at some point someone's like, so where did Sombra come from? Like, I would love it if it was just a random line before they set up the next episode is, so, what are you doing, Twilight? I'm trying to figure out how Sombra came back. He should have been banished to the ether forever, and I can't seem to figure out how he came back. Well, that's cool, but we gotta go do this pie contest. Okay, let's go do the pie contest. You know, just have a line in there, something. We'll see what they do with the rest of Season 9. I will admit, I don't want to sound negative, but my expectations are actually kind of high for Season 9. They have laid a lot of dominoes out there. We'll see what they do with it. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and chop off. I'm actually going to go ahead and host GDQ until Tuesday, which is obviously when I will be streaming again. On Tuesday, we will go ahead and be covering the Modern Warfare Remake, which is when we're going to be playing that, which we'll talk about a bit when we get there. Otherwise, I'll see you then.